Breaking. Trump's 25% auto tariff shocks global economy. Trade war erupts worldwide in a bold and highly controversial move. U.S. President Donald Trump has announced a sweeping 25% tariff on all car and light truck imports into the United States. The announcement, made in late June 2025, has sent shockwaves through global markets and triggered a rapid and aggressive response from automakers, foreign governments, and trade negotiators worldwide. Anywhere from $600 billion to $1 trillion will be taken in over the relatively short-term period, meaning a year from now, Trump declared during his televised speech. But beneath the confident projection lies a deepening economic storm. For the automotive industry, this is not just another policy shift. It is a seismic event, one that is already altering how, where, and why vehicles are manufactured across the globe. The trade war has escalated permanently and seen as temporary tools or bargaining chips. Tariffs have evolved into long-term economic weapons. Washington's latest move is part of a broader transformation, where trade policy has shifted from negotiation to confrontation. The target this time? The global automotive supply chain. Unlike past tariffs, which were phased in gradually or left loopholes for countries to negotiate exemptions, this 25% tariff was immediate and absolute. There was no grace period, no transition plan. The message from Washington was clear. If you want to sell vehicles in the U.S., you'd better build them here. That message was received loudly and painfully by global automakers. Shockwaves. Across Germany, South Korea, and beyond, German carmakers were among the hardest hit. Brands like Mercedes-Benz, which builds its S-Class sedans in Germany before shipping them to American dealerships, are suddenly staring down enormous price increases that threaten their competitiveness in the U.S. market. "This is bad news," said one German trade official. "It's a direct strike against one of our most successful export industries." In South Korea, the impact was just as brutal. Within a month of the tariff taking effect in May 2025, Hyundai and Kia reported a combined 21% drop in vehicle exports to the United States compared to the same period in 2024. That's not a dip. That's a nosedive, and it's no coincidence. According to Hyundai executives, American dealers have begun slashing orders due to ballooning costs, and Korean factories are scaling back production in anticipation of continued losses. A strategy, not a bluff. While some critics dismissed Trump's announcement as political theater, the administration's follow-through has proved otherwise. On June 12th, the president delivered a second address, reaffirming that 25% may just be the beginning. The higher you go, the more likely they are to build a plant here, Trump stated unapologetically. It wasn't a threat. It was a strategic blueprint. And its working. Hyundai, stung by the tariff, announced a $21 billion investment to expand its production footprint inside the U.S., a staggering figure by any standard. General Motors followed suit with a $4 billion plan to increase domestic manufacturing, focusing on electric vehicles and battery development. These are not decisions made lightly. Automakers typically plan investments years, even decades in advance. But with Washington wielding tariffs like surgical instruments, boardrooms are being forced to adapt. Fast. Supply chains rewritten. Prices rising. The shockwaves are being felt far beyond the automakers themselves. U.S.-based suppliers and dealers are scrambling to adjust to the new normal. According to internal estimates, Ford expects to absorb an additional $1.5 billion in annual costs due to the new tariff structure. General Motors projects even heavier losses, up to $5 billion annually. Already, vehicle prices in the U.S. are on the rise. Subaru, Ford, and BMW have all raised sticker prices on select models, citing increased input and import costs. For American consumers, This trade war is translating into higher monthly payments, smaller discounts, and fewer choices at the dealership. And the pain is only beginning. A new enforcement era, Section 232, goes tactical on June 24th. The U.S. Department of Commerce introduced a sweeping new enforcement mechanism under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act. Moving beyond flat-rate tariffs, the government is now implementing a quarterly petition process, allowing U.S. auto parts manufacturers to formally request expanded tariffs on specific imported components. This marks a radical departure from past policy. Instead of a blanket approach, tariffs will now be assessed and adjusted every quarter: January, April, July, and October, allowing the administration to target new imports with surgical precision. For U.S.-based suppliers, this opens the door to protect niche sectors. But for foreign manufacturers, it introduces constant uncertainty. The list of taxed parts could grow and shift every 90 days. Response: an existential threat. The global reaction has been swift and sharp. Japan, one of America's most vital trade partners, has elevated this issue to a matter of national economic security. Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba personally traveled to the G7 summit in Canada with a singular focus: persuading the United States to reverse course. Tokyo sees the tariff as an existential threat to its auto industry, one of the nation's largest and most prestigious sectors. Economists at Mizuho Research warn that continued enforcement of the U.S. tariff could reduce Japan's GDP by nearly 1%, a massive blow to a mature economy already grappling with demographic and inflationary pressures. Despite Ishiba's direct appeals, Washington has shown no sign of backing down. Instead, the Trump administration is considering a reciprocal tariff policy matching or exceeding any tariffs foreign governments apply to U.S. goods. If Japan imposes 20% on American cars, the U.S. will do the same, or worse. Countdown to showdown. The EU trade crisis as Japan pleads for de-escalation. The European Union is bracing for battle. A hard deadline looms: July 9th, the day on which U.S. and EU negotiators must finalize a new trade framework or face an automatic wave of retaliatory tariffs. At the core of the standoff is the Trump administration's proposal for a permanent 10% baseline tariff on a broad range of EU exports. European leaders have dismissed the plan as punitive and destabilizing. In response, the EU has already approved retaliatory tariffs on $24.5 billion worth of American goods. Behind closed doors, however, Brussels is preparing a second volley, one that could affect up to $95 billion in U.S. exports if negotiations collapse. Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, struck a defiant tone in a press conference last week. We remain committed to a fair and balanced trade framework. But make no mistake, we are fully prepared to respond proportionately and decisively. For European carmakers like Mercedes-Benz, Stellantis, and Volvo, the stakes are massive. All three have slashed earnings forecasts due to tariff-related uncertainty. Meanwhile, steel and aluminum tariffs, still set at 50%, have added another layer of cost and disruption to their operations. China versus Europe. Cognac for cars. But the global battle over tariffs isn't limited to U.S. policy. In an unexpected twist, tensions between the European Union and China have erupted over electric vehicles. In late 2024, Brussels imposed new tariffs of up to 45% on Chinese EVs, accusing Beijing of unfair subsidies. China responded not with automotive tariffs, but with something far more symbolic and strategic. Cognac. In early 2025, Beijing launched an anti-dumping investigation into French cognac, quickly followed by provisional tariffs of up to 39%. Exports plummeted. And now, China is using that pressure point as leverage. On June 27th, sources confirmed that China has proposed lifting its cognac tariffs if the EU agrees to replace its heavy import duties with a minimum price commitment system. The proposal would allow Chinese EVs into the European market, but only above a set price threshold, essentially a price floor, to prevent undercutting. European officials have not yet accepted the offer, but negotiations continue. If implemented, this approach could redefine how the global community addresses competition from Chinese automakers. A new era of economic warfare. What we are witnessing is not just a trade war, it's the dawn of a new economic era. One where tariffs are not just policies, but pressure points. One where governments no longer wait for consensus, but act unilaterally. And one where supply chains, investment plans, and even diplomatic alliances are being reimagined. For the U.S., the goal is clear: reclaim domestic manufacturing, reduce dependency on foreign supply chains, and punish what it sees as unfair trading practices. For Japan and Europe, the goal is survival. For China, it's adaptation through leverage. And for consumers, expect higher prices, fewer options, and more economic volatility in the months ahead. Conclusion: adapt or fall behind. This is not business as usual. This is a structural shift in how the world trades, builds, and buys. Automakers who fail to adapt may find themselves shut out of key markets. Countries that delay strategic adjustments risk losing entire industries. As the world hurdles toward the July 9th EU use deadline and the July 1st petition window for expanded auto part tariffs opens, the battle lines are becoming clearer. Government